Now, to react to the widespread criticism of the NPA's handling of high-profile cases, we are joined by the leader of the institution, National Director of Public Prosecutions, Advocate Shamila Batohi. It's such a pleasure to have you here this evening. Good evening, and thank you very much for your time.
Good evening, Koli. It's good to be here.
Let's start with that very meeting that the minister was talking about. She called you, and I assume your team as well. Take us into the meeting and what was discussed and what was resolved upon.
Well, the purpose of the meeting was for the minister to understand what happened in that particular case. And so we certainly met to discuss the implications of the case, but more importantly, the implications of the matter insofar as extraditions are concerned relating to the finding, because the judge in this matter dealt with the Schulz matter. And so the minister wanted to understand what the implications of this decision was and what we needed to do in order to be proactive to deal with other extraditions that are pending because of the Schulz decision. So that was the purpose of the meeting, and we've came out with resolutions in terms of how we need to try to protect certain, well, the pending extraditions, what needs to be done. And so that work is happening. So in essence, that was the basis of the meeting.
Are you able to talk to us at all about the resolutions? What is going to be done moving forward, well, as per extraditions?
Yeah, what we need to do is, I think just, this is highly technical, and I can deal with it, but there's a whole lot of other issues relating to this that I do want to talk about so that, the public understands the challenges that we're facing. Because I think my purpose of being here today is so that when there is criticism, that's what we sign up for, but it comes from a perspective of understanding. So in this particular issue, what we've decided is that we need to look at all the pending extraditions and categorize them and look at how we deal with them pending the appeal that we have lodged with regard to the Schulz decision. So that is one of the important resolutions that came out of that, and that work is ongoing.
All right. We'll come back to extraditions in a moment, but let's stay with that trial for a moment. There were very pointed rebukes directed at the NPA. It's not the first time that the institution or the agency has earned a judicial rebuke. There is a growing perception, even within your own ranks, that there's a crisis in the NPA. Mm-hmm. Do you acknowledge that there's a fundamental problem within the National Prosecuting Authority?
There's no fundamental problem within the National Prosecuting Authority, but let's deal with each aspect of there were three aspects to your question. And the first one was that the judge, if you could remind me, made some comments about the flawed prosecutions. Or I want to be very clear that in the Cholota matter, the judge made absolutely no findings about any misconduct on the part of the prosecutors. Zero. There's a confusion between the judge repeating what was said in Ms. Cholota's plea explanation, where he was quoting verbatim. But this matter was dealt with the day after the judgment, and the judge clarified that he had made absolutely no findings about the conduct of prosecutors. But that said, let me say, yes, there have been cases, other cases where that has been the case. And there have been, I would say, less than 10 cases, or 12 at most, where the NPA has been criticized for the work that it has done. 12 very important cases, I've got to say. But when you look at each one of those cases, we cannot throw the baby out with the bathwater. These are important cases. The Omotoso matter, a GBV matter.
Before you go to that, Advocate, I'm sorry to cut in. I want for the viewer to follow us,
sure,
step by step. When you say the prosecutors did not earn a rebuke from the judge, who was he talking about when he said the US authorities were not only misled, but that the actions of the people prosecuting this case actually infringed on international law, which really doesn't look good.
He was quoting from the plea explanation of Ms. Cholota. Those were not findings of the judge. And I want to be very clear about that because there is a lot of misunderstanding about this. We've had several questions about this. The team has read the plea explanation and the judgment several times. I have asked them probing questions about this because I knew this will be one of the questions. And I really want the public to understand this, that was the judge quoting. It was from Ms. Cholota's plea explanation. The judge made no findings. But I think and that is important. But I want to get to the second part of your question, where I acknowledge there have been cases where the prosecution has been criticized and the NPA has come in for severe criticism. And as I said, going to the Omotoso matter, I can go through a number of the matters, and in respect of many of them, well, all of them, I can give you technical details about where we are, whether there are appeals that are pending, etc., what we've done. But I want to say this, that in a country where there are very, very high crime levels, like ours, people are looking to be blamed. And the NPA is an easy target. I'm not saying we shouldn't be criticized, but I'm saying let us understand exactly what is going on in this country. We have a crime crisis. And to say that because of a dozen cases, the NPA is in crisis and it's failing, is not to understand the real challenges that we're having in this country. All of these setbacks, all of them we've had, have been, for me as a national director, it's been like a punch to the gut. I've been fighting for justice all my life. And when these setbacks happen in courts, it makes you sit back and reflect and think, how can this happen? What are we doing wrong? Yeah. How can we change what is happening in this country? And so, in as much as these things have happened, we've reflected on every one of those cases. We've done lessons learned to look at what can we do differently. But I want us to really caution that because of a few cases, as I said, we don't properly interrogate what is the real crime problem in this country. It's easy to put Shamila Batohi as the face of failure, but we really need to look at the challenges that we're facing, both systemic. These are red herrings in my view. They're important, they are critically important cases. Let me emphasize that. The victims in the Omotoso case, that broke my heart because I have been fighting for gender-based justice, gender-based violence, justice for victims throughout my life. And that case was one of the most painful decisions I've had to deal with. But you've got to look at the fact that systemically, in order for us to deal with crime, I have experienced how difficult it is in a system that has been broken through state capture and various other reasons to try to build a solid institution. In fact, our MTDP, that's our government strategy, let me put it that way, actually says we need to have ethical and capable institutions. How difficult it is to actually set up ethical and capable institutions, you will not understand unless you are in the institution within government trying to do that. So these are, I'm not trying to make any excuses for the cases before court. I can deal with each one of them technically. But I want to urge that in doing this, we don't actually address the real crime problem and and the solutions that we can potentially find in that regard.
I want us to take a break, but we're going to pick up on what I think you appear to be admitting to, and that is that there is a leadership failure in some instances, or perhaps many instances, where things have gone wrong. So we'll pick up on that shortly after this. You're watching News at Prime. If you're just joining us, we're talking to the National Director of Public Prosecutions, Advocate Shamila Batohi, and the state of the institution she runs. Advocate, let's go perhaps to a real-life case, Omotoso. You've made references to it a number of times now. When you say that that case fell apart, what practical steps have been taken, and I'm talking consequence management, because there were very, very clear examples of failure there, or perhaps even self-sabotage?
So let me firstly say, before we took the break, you said that I seem to be alluding to leadership failures. I am not in any way alluding to leadership failures, but certainly in the country there seems to be a suggestion that there are leadership failures. And you know, that seems to be something that is being driven in Parliament as well. But you know, what politicians say in Parliament, it doesn't really, you know, I don't take it to heart, because you know, that's a different animal out there. But with regard to the Omotoso matter, I have explained this several times. There were issues with the conduct of prosecutors, and the judge actually found that, well, let me explain it this way so that the country understands. There were two teams of prosecutors. The first team that dealt with this matter, that first team was changed when there were initial allegations that the prosecutor in that matter had tried to influence improperly the witnesses. So that team was changed by the DPP. So when the trial was concluded, there was a new team that had been involved in that aspect, the trial itself. That is where the judge made several criticisms about the conduct of prosecutors, relating to cross-examination, relating to other aspects. When that happened, there were three things that I did. Immediately, the first thing we did is we set up a team, not from the Eastern Cape, external to the Eastern Cape, to look at the prospects of success on appeal. We also got two senior counsel because of the fact that the credibility of the prosecutors was questionable because of the judgment. We wanted to get external opinion as well on the prospects of success on appeal. You now know that we've applied for leave to appeal in that matter. The second thing that I did is I appointed, well, there was an inquiry that started last year in August already into the conduct of the first team of prosecutors. Let me put it that way. We boosted that team. We expanded the mandate of that team. And I'm hoping, in fact, they said that I should get their report by mid-June. And once I get that report, we will look at whether disciplinary steps should be taken or what's the consequence management. And the third thing we did is we appointed an external team to look at the entire transcript of the trial, to look at whether the judge's comments about the criticism of the prosecutors was actually justified, and then to decide what we should do there. And so all of these things were put in place in order to ensure we did a lessons, you know, we reflected very, very carefully on this to consider what can we do better so that victims of sexual and gender-based violence don't feel that they can't have confidence in the criminal justice system. And this is an important issue because this particular case severely dented our fight against gender-based violence in this country. And we deal with thousands of cases every day. We have the Tutuzela Care Centers, that is an international best practice that gives the best support to victims of sexual and gender-based violence.
Advocate,
and the
the
reason why I say this is I want victims to know that the NPA will not fail you, that you must come forward, you have to speak out when these things happen.
The reality here, Advocate Batohi, is that victims did come forward, and the first installment of that trial, it fell apart because the new judge had to also take over. But 8 years down the line, you're still promising that victims will get justice. I say to you, that sounds hollow because the man is not even in the country, and we can't get our actions right to get people back into South Africa. What hope is there for these victims?
So let me deal with this in this way. That matter took 8 years. That is correct. And that is because the prosecution has no say over, when judges have to be changed. And a lot of the adjournments was not due to the prosecution itself. There are a number of cases that unfortunately take a long time in our system. It should not happen to gender-based violence. Look, we've got statistics that most of the gender-based violence cases take under 2 years to complete, and some even less than that. So the average is good, but certain cases, unfortunately, because of systemic problems, do take a long time. And this was, unfortunately, one of those cases.
Right. Why did prosecutors lead the extradition of Moradi Cholota and not the Department of Justice?
So we've been doing extraditions forever in this country, for as long as extradition started. The NPA has always been transmitting the requests, but the process is that it goes to the Department of Justice, which is the central authority. There, the minister does sign a document, and this has been the process for as long as we have been doing extraditions. This is the first time where this process was challenged in court. And the position was taken that the minister is the one that should be transmitting and not the NPA.
There was a precedent here already, Advocate. You can't surely have missed that.
I beg your pardon?
There was a precedent. There was a case, the Schulz case.
Yes.
That was the precedent-setting case.
That's right.
So how could you have overlooked that?
We didn't overlook it. The Schulz case was decided long after the application for the extradition of Ms. Cholota had been submitted. So the Schulz case actually came after that. And we are now appealing the Schulz judgment. And so, we did not overlook it. The procedure has always been that the NPA has submitted these requests. But during that process of the Schulz, when we decided to appeal, we agreed that it should be the minister that transmits it. So we're looking, as I said, at all the old extraditions to see what we can do there. But the NPA agrees that, the minister should be the one. And so their process is being put in place to deal with that. But the challenge is the retrospective application of Schulz. And that is what is still on appeal at the moment.
All right. So Shepered Bushiri still is out of South Africa. There's an attempt to extradite him. Ultimately, when you do decide that extradition is the next step on Omotoso, that's going to have to be the next step there. The Guptas, it almost sounds like a distant memory. There's been a long-standing attempt to get them to get to South Africa. So I'm pointing out these cases merely to say to you, can you say without a shadow of doubt that these people that are sought by the South African justice system are going to ultimately be brought here? Can you say that with a straight face?
What I can say without a shadow of doubt is that none of those challenges is because of the NPA. And I can deal with each one of those. Firstly, with Bushiri, he left the country. The NPA had nothing to do with that. He was standing trial in this country and he left. How can the NPA be blamed for that? And of course, we are fighting the case in Malawi, and the matter is being appealed there. We are working very closely with the DPP in Malawi to make sure that we do whatever's possible to bring him back to this country.
Yeah.
On the Omotoso matter, that was an issue where the Department of Home Affairs decided to deport him. I want to say that there was very, very close collaboration between all the justice cluster, the relevant justice cluster departments in this process. And so it's a no-win situation for the NPA, because we have a situation where a person is now a free person because he's been acquitted in a case, he's a free person. He could have left the country willingly. But the Department of Home Affairs decided that we actually find him undesirable in this country. And we want to make sure that, we get him out of this country. And he eventually left. So we have a situation where
How do you explain collaboration in that regard, though?
No. We spoke very closely about this, and let me explain that. We are in a situation where we are appealing that decision. That appeal can take a number of years. And so we are in a situation where the victims feel, because of the fact that he's been acquitted, that we have this undesirable person, that is still living in this country, enjoying the good life in South Africa, so to speak, whilst the victims feel that they haven't received justice. And he could have continued doing that for years in this country. He's got a lot of money, and I've got no doubt that his appeal, he would have taken it all the way to the Constitutional Court. And that can take a number of years. But we're pursuing that process.
All right.
In the meantime, he's out of the country, and once this process is over, if we're successful, we will do everything possible to bring him back. And on the Guptas, which was the third extradition one that you mentioned, we are still trying to understand from the UAE how that application failed. We have sent numerous notes verbal to the UAE, and we haven't satisfactorily received responses to that. But we are nevertheless, the IDAC in the NPA is working very hard, and I don't want to give a time frame, but I'm certainly hoping in the next couple of months, they will be able to put together a new extradition with additional charges. But we will still face the challenge, because we certainly don't want to experience the same fate with a new extradition application when we don't have clarity about some of the reasons for the UAE court denying the first application.
Is there a sense within the NPA that some decisions, prosecutorial decisions, let me not say some decisions, prosecutorial decisions, are influenced by political dynamics rather than legal merit? And can you assure the public that the institution is run independently and it is insulated from political pressure?
What I can say is that the Constitution guarantees that independence, but you have de facto and de jure independence. I can say that I have not had interference from any members of the executive whilst I have been the national director. But what I do want to say is that there are other issues that I can't really speak about that actually makes me worry sometimes, that the NPA is actually being infiltrated by people that do not have the rule of law at heart. And that, for me, as the national director, is hugely concerning.
You have to explain that,
And
Advocate. I can't let you go
I'm
without
afraid, as I
getting
said,
deeper into that, because that is of huge concern. This is the period where the NPA has gone through, and South Africans will surely not sleep comfortably tonight after hearing you say that if you don't back it up with whatever it is that you mean.
I don't sleep comfortably at night because of that, not because I think that the NPA is a failing organization.
So what do you mean?
I can't speak a lot about this, but I am concerned about the attacks on the NPA, on the national director, and the reasons for this. And I can't speak too much because it's difficult, but it's something that I am going to take up very, very seriously.
With?
With the executive.
The president, let's be clear.
We need to actually understand exactly what is going on and why it is sometimes so difficult to actually do this job, because you have all the challenges of a system, but you also have lots of agendas, externally and internally. And this is a serious concern for me. That said, I do want to say that the majority of the prosecutors, and I can put my head on a block and say this, are committed, dedicated prosecutors who will do anything to stand up for the rule of law and will ensure that they do their work without fear, favor, or prejudice. But I cannot say that all prosecutors in the NPA would do that, and that is a serious concern.
You have led the NPA now for some time. You're about to retire soon. And some will say you've led it through embarrassing moments and moments where the public really lacks confidence in the institution now. Do you accept perhaps some personal responsibility for the organization's failures? Because what you're describing now, without wanting to go into detail, some people are going to say you're deflecting.
Sure.
You've run your race. There hasn't been really much that they will say you can hold up and say this is a success. And so you're going to blame politicians. What personal responsibility do you take for the failures?
I'm not blaming anyone. I think, you know, as the national director, I think these 10 or 12 cases that have been the big failures cannot determine whether the NPA, in fact, as an institution, whether we have successfully turned around a captured institution. And I think that, I know that if, for example, I have to say, what are the 3 most important things that I've done, I think we've done exceptionally well. One is our performance in the past 3 or 4 years has increased from about 50 to 75%. The second thing is our asset recovery. In the past 5 years, we have recovered close to 50% that the asset forfeiture unit has recovered since inception in 2000. That is the amount of funds we have recovered. The next thing is the IDAC that has been set up. And I think finally, I would really sleep easy that we have a prosecuting authority that is professional, that is well budgeted, we have solid policies, and that at the end of the day, we stand for justice for the victims. And so, in as much as, yes, the people are, I'm certainly disappointed with these setbacks. I am certainly very, very proud of where the NPA is today.
Advocate Shamila Batohi, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Hopefully, we'll have another round at this just before you go off into the sunset.